Welcome, everyone. This is an Educators in VR event here in Engage XR, and we, for years, we've been bringing our special topics program from Yale University Psychology Department to present this. It's student-led, student imagination, student-driven, to really dive in to all the different ways that XR technology is being used for mental health therapies and related topics. And today, we're going to be talking about cyberbullying. And I want to introduce to you the amazing teacher behind all of this. So, Dr. Anthony Chasten.
Thanks, Ralph. Again, welcome everybody to this event, and welcome to all my students that are here today. This is all about you guys, not me, so I'm just going to talk for a minute or two. The only thing I really want to say here is just to remind everybody in the audience that this is an educational event, both for audience guests and also for the students that are here. So we'll be talking throughout this series of events. There's 6 of them in total. We'll be talking about therapies and treatments and all of these interesting things related to psychology and immersive digital technologies. But I want to remind everybody that's here that we're not training therapists here. These are undergraduate students. As much as anything, they're learning how to present in this environment, and they're using topics related to our course in psychology for that. So I hope everybody learns and learns a wonderful amount of things from these presentations. But just to remind everybody, this is my disclaimer, right? That basically, just remember, this is an educational training experience for the students that are doing the presentation, as much as education for the audience. Okay, with that aside, without further ado, I turn the floor over to Group 1.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming today. I'm having some computer issues, so it might kick me out. Let's hope it works for now. But so we're Group 1. My name is Fluffy Dragon. I'm joined with Eunice and Official Crowd. So today we're discussing anonymity, harmful behavior online, and safety risks in online social environments. So feel free to unmute for this part, because we want to know, do you think people are nicer, meaner, or the same when they're anonymous? Yeah, feel free to unmute.
I think they're meaner.
Okay, yeah. Well, research shows that anonymity can influence how people behave online, but it does not automatically cause harmful actions. Instead, anonymity can reduce the social costs associated with expressing aggressive or negative speech. According to Teo Kipi and colleagues, when individuals feel less identifiable, they may feel less accountable for their behavior. This reduced accountability weakens the influence of social norms, immediate feedback from others, and fear of consequences. As a result, people may be more willing to express hostility or aggression online. However, the authors emphasize that anonymity itself does not directly cause aggression. Rather, it creates conditions where aggression is more easily expressed. Evidence shows that many online attacks come from strangers, highlighting that anonymity allows users to target others without direct accountability, which can amplify the reach and intensity of harmful behaviors.
So, understanding why people seek anonymity online helps explain these behaviors. A study by Louis Nitschnick and other colleagues introduced the Online Anonymity Questionnaire, or the OAQ, to measure motivations for being anonymous on the internet. Their research identified 2 main motivations: anonymous self-expression and toxic anonymity. Anonymous self-expression refers to people wanting privacy or freedom to express thoughts and feelings without judgment. Toxic anonymity, on the other hand, involves using anonymity to engage in harmful or antisocial behavior.
The study found that both motivations are linked with spending more time online and having anonymous social media accounts. Interestingly, anonymous self-expression was associated with traits like private self-awareness and social anxiety, suggesting some individuals use anonymity as a protective tool. Toxic anonymity, however, was associated with lower levels of honesty, humility, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. It was also linked with darker personality traits such as Machiavellianism or sadism. These findings suggest that motivations for anonymity can help predict whether individuals are more likely to behave positively or negatively while anonymous online.
Another important perspective comes from Lauren R. Shapiro. The researchers argue that traditional bullying and online harassment share similarities, but they are not identical. One key difference is persistence. Offline bullying usually ends when the bully and victim are no longer physically together. Online harassment, however, can continue indefinitely because the internet provides constant access to victims 24 hours a day. But first, who knows what the definition of cyberbullying is? Clap, unmute, or spam emojis if you have heard of cyberbullying or you know what it is. Yeah, also.
Cyberbullying typically refers to repeated acts of aggression between minors, while cyber harassment generally involves adults and may include behaviors like spam, unwanted sexual content, or solicitation and voyeurism. These actions can occur between strangers, acquaintances, or even intimate partners.
The online environment also introduces unique factors that make harassment easier to carry out. This includes anonymity, along with de-individuation and a sense of reduced accountability. Additionally, victims often believe they are targeted due to disability, sexuality, or ethnicity.
Research done by Joseph B. Walther and Ronald E. Rice also shows that online hate often targets identity-based characteristics such as gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and political beliefs. Younger individuals, particularly those between 18 and 29, who spend more time online, report experiencing higher levels of online harassment. Women, LGBTQ individuals, and racial minorities are especially likely to be targeted. Studies suggest that gender-based harassment is one of the most common forms of online hate. In one large analysis of Twitter posts, women were the most frequently insulted groups, receiving more than 60% of hateful tweets in the dataset.
It was also found that about 1 in 5 women report experiencing hate-based harassment online. LGBTQ individuals face similarly high levels of harassment, with more than half reporting experiences of online hate. Research from the United Nations also indicated that more than 70% of targeted by hate speech on social media are members of minority groups. Offline events can also trigger waves of online hate. Political conflicts or a public health crisis often intensify hostile online discourse. For example, political debates surrounding events like the Brexit referendum or COVID-19 pandemic contributed to spikes in nationalistic, racial, and political hate speech on social media.
While anonymity can sometimes enable harmful behavior, it also plays a role in protecting freedom and safety online. Alison Macrina and Taylor Cooper argue that anonymity allows individuals to express opinions and seek information without fear of judgment or retaliation. In many situations, anonymity provides a necessary layer of protection that enables people to participate more freely in discussions, especially when topics are sensitive or controversial.
Historically, anonymity has supported democratic participation and social change. For example, the political writer Thomas Paine originally published the influential pamphlet, Common Sense Anonymously, which helped encourage public support for the American Revolution. These examples illustrate how anonymity can allow individuals to challenge powerful institutions without immediately risking personal safety or retaliation.
Because of these risks, many experts emphasize that anonymity should not simply be viewed as a tool or harmful behavior. Instead, it is a complex feature of digital communication that can both protect vulnerable individuals and create challenges for online safety. Understanding this balance is important when designing policies, technologies, and community guidelines that aim to reduce harm while still protecting freedom of expression.
Ultimately, anonymity is not inherently good or bad. Its impact depends on how and why people use it. When supported by responsible platform design, clear moderation policies, and community awareness, anonymity can help create safer and more inclusive online environments while still protecting individuals who need privacy the most. All right. If you'll follow us over to this next infographic just across the room. And we will Move on to accountability. Before we start, can we see a thumbs up if you spend at least part of your day in some kind of digital space? All right, seeing a couple thumbs. So that's pretty much all of us, right? Talking about accountability in digital spaces, it's important to define these terms: digital spaces, discriminatory behaviors, and accountability. Starting with digital spaces, these are places where we feel to be when we use electronic tools to interact with other individuals or entities for economic or social purposes. Discriminatory behaviors are actions or decisions that treat an individual or group unfairly, negatively, or differently based on protected personal characteristics. Online, this often shows up as cyberbullying. Lastly, accountability is the process of being held responsible by some authority for one's action. It's important to learn what type of accountability is happening right now and the possible ways to make digital spaces safer for all users.
There has not been much research on discriminatory acts in VR spaces, not because it's not happening, but because these digital spaces are newer than most. However, there have been many studies on what levels and types of accountability that have been occurring in social media. This knowledge can be transferable to VR spaces and can give us some insights on how to be more aware of the circumstances individuals face and the behaviors of individuals online.
As previously mentioned, there's a lot of anonymity that occurs in digital platforms. React if you have ever seen someone say something online that would never pass in person. Great. Unfortunately, anonymity makes engaging in discriminatory behaviors online much easier as it reduces accountability. No one knows who you are, they don't know who to blame. Encrypted messaging risk services that prioritize anonymity for users make it difficult to be surveyed and for discriminatory behaviors to be detected, allowing for more freedom to act in harmful ways.
A lot of the time, there's someone there to witness these discriminatory acts. But why is it being ignored? Taylor and colleagues found that the main reason as to why bystanders do not act against the action is because of the lack of accountability and empathy they feel towards the victim. They're not the ones doing it, and the anonymity digital spaces provide make knowing a person quite difficult. So it's hard to feel some type of responsibility and take action. These findings reveal that not only is there a lack of accountability among perpetrators, but also third parties.
Beyond individual users, lawmakers, AI, and social media organizations also play major roles. As highlighted by McWillie and Negamani 2025, there are not enough consistent international laws regarding cyber harassment caused by jurisdictional difficulties, lack of regulation, and resources. New forms of cyber harassment are being put to use faster than the law can stop them, and these issues are especially prominent in minority populations, such as LGBTQ, women of color, rural and low-income folks.
AI also complicates accountability. AI has no sense of boundaries. It is able to survey and track citizens, spread disinformation, and sensitive information. AI can get in the way with not taking accountability for harm that it has caused. Traditional methods of holding individuals responsible are not applicable to AI, making it difficult to hold AI accountable for harm done in digital spaces.
As for social media organizations, Clune and McDade explain that there's a level of accountability that social media organizations are responsible for. This controls the type of content that is shared on their platform, minimizing discriminatory behaviors. However, controlling user behaviors is extremely difficult. The anonymity of the internet is what pulls users in, but it also allows users to behave in ways that may not be acceptable in real life. Although organizations and governments can be held accountable and aid in making digital spaces safer, users also need to start taking accountability.
These findings only emphasizes our need for increased accountability online regarding discriminatory behaviors. For organizations and governments, there is a need for digital consent laws, international collaborations, accountability on behalf of the platforms, and increased involvement. Regarding AI, There's a need for technology that considers human rights, as well as a need for updates to the traditional ways of holding wrongdoers accountable, which can be applicable to things such as AI. This includes controlling AI and what it is capable of.
For users, we can hold interventions to increase accountability and empathy, which can include methods such as empathy nudges, which are subtle behavioral interventions designed to prompt individuals to consider the feelings, perspectives, or experiences of others, which increases empathy and pro-social behavior. And it can also increase social transparency regarding self-presentation concerns. Self-presentation is how people choose to present themselves online to be perceived in a certain way. Most importantly, there's a need for education and awareness to understand the importance of a culture of respect and accountability online.
As there is still a lack of accountability, we must provide support to discriminatory behaviors online. VR can play a key role in aiding victims overcome the struggles they've endured online. Badger found evidence that VR scenarios could evoke bullying-related psychological reactions. The VR scenario could potentially be used in educational and therapeutic settings to enhance empathy towards victimized children or enhance resilience following victimization. Overall, these findings reveal some very key points about accountability that can be transferable to many different digital spaces, especially those within VR.
All right, so if everybody can follow me, we'll be now moving to this infographic right here called Power Dynamics in Digital Spaces. Yeah, this one right here. So when it comes to the discussion of virtual reality and online gaming, sometimes the topic of power dynamics is missed when creating those spaces, especially how to uncover them and how to deal with them going forward.
Some would like to consider virtual spaces as equal spaces, but that is not others' experiences. Research conducted by Vander stated that online games often mirror real-life experiences, especially when we consider race, gender, and sexuality.
Additionally, using the word dominant as the power structure has been expected in Western culture.
That power doesn't just show up in technology alone, but how we interact with each other. What many don't realize is that these virtual environments often mirror real life. People are able to choose how they represent themselves, therefore making them feel they have authority over the space.
Even though these virtual environments are meant to build a community and help people communicate in a different way, marginalized groups often feel excluded and no longer participate in what is meant to be a welcoming community.
Especially when we have issues navigating race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. These aspects are often not taken into consideration, and moving forward, it's something we need to do more. Virtual reality is supposed to be a break from what we experience in real life, not a repeat of what we experience.
Another important factor is how the platforms are shaped to initiate these interactions. The ability to be able to create avatars and change what they look like, or add anything they like, can change how they react with each other. Whether it's people make themselves look bigger than others to create that intimidating vibe, there's also the concept where options may be limited or biased on certain platforms. This could restrict how people see themselves and how they represent others and themselves.
A way someone can represent themselves is through the way they speak. In digital spaces, language becomes a tool of power, and how we use that power to use people. Research shows that oftentimes when people are able to present themselves in ways that they aren't in person, they often feel like they have that advantage.
The way we communicate each other can signify respect. Once again, this is where communication comes in. Language in spaces where it already doesn't feel neutral can confirm other social dynamics. Toxic speech can push people out, but inclusive language can challenge these power structures.
There will be resistance in these environments as users push back, but fortunately, these power dynamics can be contested.
We can also, as previously mentioned, be anonymous. It can empower people to express themselves, but also reduce accountability, as some may feel there are no consequences that follow.
Researchers often call this toxic discourse, which is patterns of communication and behaviors that enable and normalize harassment. These patterns aren't random and are tied to those who have power in the space.
Identity has always been tied to power in virtual environments. Research shows that how people represent themselves and how others perceive them shapes their access to authority and respect in digital spaces.
Additionally, like this class, VR is being used for educational purpose. I think this is such a fun and interactive way to meet with others as we have with our VR educators. But research have also mentioned that it's important for these educators to be mindful of the possible dynamics that may come out of this.
Oftentimes, individuals learning about the VR world may already not know how to navigate it. A heads up and maybe some warnings about how to protect oneself on these platforms is important.
It is important for designers and developers to be able to take the time and create these creative features. Whether it is being able to meet others or navigating the area a bit better to establish better features to project those who are new to these environments.
Additionally, we should also think about using more inclusive language. Maybe think about how we are better able to track the language being used and the behaviors being expressed in these digital spaces and provide consequences for them as we would in real life.
All right, and if everyone will follow me to the other side of the room, we will have our last infographic here. We're now going to talk about people, community, and VR spaces. More specifically, discriminatory acts in online spaces.
When most people think about discrimination online, they usually think about things like rude comments, hate speech, or harassment on social media. And that is definitely part of it. But in VR and other social virtual spaces, it can go a lot further than just that.
One of the biggest things the research shows is that VR can do two things at once. On one hand, it can create meaningful connections. People use these spaces to make friends, build communities, explore identity, and find support. For some people, especially for those who may feel isolated offline, VR can be a really valuable space for belonging.
But on the other hand, those same spaces can also reproduce a lot of the same inequalities and discrimination we see in real life. Things like racism, sexism, exclusion, and stalking don't just disappear because the space is virtual. In some cases, they can actually feel even more intense.
And that is really the core idea we want to focus on today. Community in VR is real, but so is discrimination.
What makes VR different is that harm is not only happening through text on a screen. In VR, people interact through voice, avatars, movement, gestures, proximity, and sometimes even haptic feedback. So when something harmful happens, it can feel a lot more personal and immediate. It is not just reading a hateful message. It can feel like someone is invading your personal space, following you, targeting your identity, or making you feel unsafe in real time.
Research points to a few common forms of discriminatory behaviors in VR and related online spaces.
The first is identity-based verbal abuse. That includes racist slurs, sexist comments, homophobic language, and attacks on things like religion, disability, nationality, or cultural identity.
The second is embodied harassment, which is something that really stands out in VR. This can look like someone following you too closely, surrounding you, cornering you, making sexual or threatening gestures towards your avatar, or using virtual touch in ways that are unwanted.
Another important one is consent and boundary violations. A lot of newer research shows that harm in VR is often best understood through the idea of boundaries. In these spaces, people want control over who can approach them, who can interact with them, and how close others can get. When those boundaries are ignored, the experience can feel really violating, even if it's happening in a virtual environment.
There is also exclusion, which I think is important to mention because discrimination is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it looks like people leaving certain people out, mocking their avatars, refusing access to social groups, or making them feel like they have to hide who they are just to be accepted.
We also know that women, especially young women, often experience more sexualized harassment and that marginalized users often have to do extra work just to participate safely. Some people avoid certain spaces, stay quiet, hide parts of their identity, or only interact with trusted groups to protect themselves.
So, why does VR make all of this feel different? Well, there's a few big reasons. First is embodiment. People often feel connected to their avatar, like it represents them. So harm directed at the avatar can feel personal.
Second, there is proximity. In regular online spaces, harassment is often worse just on a screen. In VR, it can happen through crowding, grooming, blocking, movement, or simulated touching.
Third, there's voice. Voice can reveal so much more than text. Things like accent, gender, cues, age, and emotion. That can be great for connection, but it can also make identity-based targeting easier.
And finally, VR is immersive. Because it feels more real, the emotional impact can feel more real as well.
Another really important point is that these harms are not rare. A lot of users report harassment and negative experiences in online multiplayer and immersive spaces. And those experiences change behavior. People leave, withdraw, self-censor, or stop participating altogether. So this is not just about a few bad moments online. It affects who gets to feel comfortable in these spaces and who gets pushed out.
I also think it's important to talk about community here because community can do both good and harm.
VR communities can be incredibly supportive. They can reduce loneliness, create friendship, and give people a space to explore who they are. But communities can also normalize harmful behavior. When harassment gets brushed off as just trolling, or when people are told to mute and move on, or even when bystanders say nothing, that kind of behavior becomes part of the culture of the space.
So the issue is not only about individual people behaving badly, it is also about what the platform allows, what the community accepts, and who is expected to carry the burden of staying safe.
Right now, a lot of safety tools in VR are pretty reactive. Things like mute, block, and report can help, but they often put the responsibility on the person being targeted. Research suggests that what is really needed is a more proactive approach. Better safety by design, clear consent tools, stronger moderation, better voice protections, and community norms that actually support people instead of leaving them to handle it on their own.
So the final message we want to leave with you is this: virtual harm is still real harm.
If VR spaces are real social spaces, then what happens in them matters. The discrimination people experience there affects belonging, safety, participation, and mental well-being in very real ways.
At the same time, this is not saying VR is all bad. VR has a lot of potential. It can be creative, supportive, and deeply social. But if you want these spaces to actually live up to that potential, then safety and inclusion have to be built into them from the start.
Because the goal should not just be immersive spaces. It should be immersive spaces where people feel welcome. All right, that concludes this portion of the event. If you want to follow me outside, we'll have our scenario maze here. So just before we enter the maze, I want to give a little background as to what this is. You're going to be encountered with a scenario. There's going to be some options underneath it. And there's different sections of the maze where these options will be explored. You can always go back and choose a different option if you want. There are 3 scenarios in total, and I'll leave it up to you guys to explore. Do you have any questions?
And you'll
Awesome.
find the choices in writing just on the board in front of the graphic here. And you'll find A, B, and C, different hallways you can walk down.
All right.
So group one, we're all starting to come out of the maze. What should we do now?
Perfect. We just rendezvous here with us, and there's going to be a nice little debrief.
Hi everybody, just a few debrief little questions we have for everybody. So, out of all the scenarios in the maze, which felt the most realistic to you? Feel free to unmute.
For me, it was the last one, I think.
Oh yeah, do you want to expand on that?
I just feel like it's a bit tougher to speak out in certain social certain social situations is kind of like my angle on it. So it's like it's a lot easier to do something in private. I think it's like a bit more public, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree. I also felt kind of the same way about it.
Did any of your choices change after hearing some of the outcomes for the scenarios? Also, feel free to unmute to hear your thoughts.
I would just say that I found, just in general, whenever you read these scenarios, it just reminds you of specific circumstances you've had where you've seen almost one of these play out, you know, almost exactly like this. And it just reminded me how common these things are actually.
Yeah, it sounds about right, honestly. But like, if your answer is good too, that's a good thing too, because it shows that we need to think about how our day-to-day like goes and how we think of our actions, and based on that first action, how we would change certain scenarios the next time. So I think it's really good. It shows that we're learning to respond more thoughtfully in these situations.
Yeah. Anybody else? No? All right.
I would give us a chance to unmute.
Oh, sorry.
I want to comment on the visuals because The scenarios themselves were important, but it involves a lot of reading. It's hard to read in VR. You're moving fast and such. But the visuals that you use, the one with the mouths all around that person, and those struck harder emotionally than the written scenarios, because they were just so, I don't even have the word, but they, you know, they were like artwork, but they also just were visceral. I could feel that. And sometimes what we feel isn't a clear picture in our own heads. And you painted the picture of what it feels like on many of these scenarios. So well done on that. That just was a really different response for me. And I just want to tell you how much I admire it, because that sank home deeper than the words. Really wonderful.
I was going to say, yeah, I saw you like double back to go in for like a round 2, and I thought that was really sweet.
Yeah, it's really well done. And I'd like to know from you all, how did you make those, the only words I have are artistic decisions, to represent visually the emotional quality of each of those scenarios?
No, it's really interesting. While we were building the maze, we were sort of limited in our options of what we can choose to build with. So, but that kind of limitation allowed us to be more creative in a way, because with those options, we saw the mouths and we're like, oh, that's perfect. Like, that's exactly what it feels like. And so, yeah, thank you. We really appreciate that you noticed that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, a lot of the ways we wanted to do it is, obviously these things are happening in a digital world, but it can still feel like something is happening to us. Like if someone is saying, you know, these discriminatory things to us, they're bullying us, that can still feel real to us, you know, just in real life. So we wanted to sort of represent how that might feel, like in that third scenario, if someone is speaking poorly to you.
Yeah, you did that. You did that. No, well, I'm sorry to interrupt, because I want to jump on that, because that was brilliant.
No worries.
The visuals that you chose made me feel. And that I just want to give full credit on that. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Which makes the second question that follows this is well-deserved applause. This is a tough topic to do. So what came up for y'all doing this?
For me, I like, because I'm the person who like pushed the idea of like, I guess, discussing this to some degree. But like when it came, because I felt like it'd be better to tackle this because it's, well, A, it's very relevant to like our class itself, and B, like I feel like to some degree it's a very shared experience, right? Like we all like online safety and just like online like concerns, or I think are something that can resonate with everybody, and people can come into this with like a degree of understanding and like a degree of an opinion to some degree, right? I know I'm saying a degree a lot, but like I think it's just like in some way there's some ease in presenting this just because people know, you know, like it's like jumping on what Tony said, like when you see those like situations, like, oh, like this has some basis in some reality, you know.
How about the rest of you?
I think sort of in saying that, we also know that VR is something that is sort of developing very quickly. And sometimes when things develop quickly, the proper safeguards aren't thought about as often, because everyone's always thinking about, oh, we can do all these cool things in this space, that it sort of gets overlooked when discussing VR.
And we kind of talked about it earlier in the infographics and sort of earlier, but it's really just us reflecting what we see in real life in the maze. Like these are like very real scenarios that we felt like could totally happen. And yeah, it was pretty disheartening, but at the same time, kind of like, it's kind of nice to just put it on the page, like put it somewhere, how we feel about all these situations.
Which brings us to the next really important question. You brought up, and I'm sure many of us are thinking this, so I'm speaking for all of us. You brought up some solutions that were pretty vague. Now that you've been through this and we have these great scenarios and you've been in VR, what can VR developers and platforms really do? This is cyberbullying is one of my passion projects for educators in VR and personally. And so what do you really suggest? What can they really do to improve this?
I think one way, especially with social media that they've implemented, is when they see words that aren't being used in the correct way or just inappropriate language, they have blocked off or censored even sending it to the other person. So I think that could be implemented in some way in VR, where if things are being said like multiple times where they're like, okay, maybe this isn't right, I think that could be implemented in some type of way.
Safeguards, like different ways to sort of document and maybe like we talked about earlier, maybe like finding ways to, maybe block or mute certain players if they're acting in, aggressive ways or discriminatory ways. Yeah.
Yeah, to sort of jump off of that, I think while safeguards are ultimately very important in protecting these spaces, we also have to sort of talk about how we can influence the culture within these virtual spaces so that these issues don't come up in the first place. Obviously, the safeguards are there for when they inevitably do come up, but you want to try and minimize it by fostering that sort of welcoming environment.
Yeah, it's just to jump off what Julian's saying. I think it was mentioned during the infographic, but like you kind of need an intersectional design approach when building these sort of online spaces, in which case you are considering these sorts of things. What do you think Tony thinks? Tony, what's your opinion?
I'm not supposed to have an opinion. I'm grading, remember? That's just a joke.
Forgot about that.
Well, I know that many of you all play games. You play games. You play games in video games and all kinds of online games as well. VR maybe we're hoping expanding, and you run into people and stuff. How can that process be improved? And what are your thoughts on it, Tony? Does that help prevent you from?
I was just kidding, by the way. Yeah, I mean, I don't spend a lot of time in social media personally, right? I don't use social media platforms, any of them. And so I don't experience it, I think, directly in the way that a lot of people do, but I experience it a little more in these kinds of spaces, like when I'm in these immersive digital spaces. And for me, then it becomes quite personal because there's certain things that affect me more than others. Yeah, I'm one of those people who is quite sensitive to the things that people say, and some person says something, I will stew on it for a while, and so I have to sometimes. That's one of the reasons I don't use social media platforms, is because of this sort of a challenge, and it's exactly what we don't want, right? If we want to invite people into, say, a space that is for healing, or a space that is for wellness, or a space that is for education, we want people to feel welcomed and we want them to feel comfortable. So it's on some level, it's easy. I always tell students it's easy in here on some level. Whatever is acceptable in the regular world is acceptable here, and vice versa. What's not acceptable is not acceptable. That's great, but it's also incredibly oversimplified, right? Like, in terms of that doesn't actually help solve the real problems. So I'll follow up on Rel's point, and I want at least a couple of the students to see if they have anything else to just add here. But as Rel pointed out, most of you play multiplayer online kind of gaming. I just want to ask the question, because I don't. I play a lot of online gaming, but actually I don't play a lot of online gaming. I play a lot of games, but I play mostly the single player stuff. So for those of you who play online and are online in multiplayer games and online multiplayer platforms, how big a problem is this? That's the question that I don't know, because I'm not there. And so I'm curious for you, is this like a big problem, or is this a minor problem in those kinds of platforms?
I know from my experience, I feel like ironically the ones that tend to be directed towards kids tend to have the worst problem with like cyberbullying, like especially things like Roblox or like Star Stable tend to be more toxic than like something isolated.
Why do you think so?
I guess maybe a lot of it can be sort of related to immaturity and maybe wanting to like shock people with like what you're saying, or this sort of stuff where it's like your parents aren't normally like supervising you as much in these spaces, or a teacher, as they would at school or in real life, so you can feel more like you can say what you want.
So testing boundaries, because research has found that most bullying tends to quit somewhere between 8th and 12th grade in general. So immaturity definitely, and testing boundaries, how far can you go? Testing relationships, I think that's important. But but what about adults? Adult bullying, having been the subject of that myself. Why do you think it continues? And I mean, and it continues in games. So I guess I'm still asking the same question. I'm looking for solutions. Think of things as a developer, like on this platform. You know, how can it be safer? How can we design safer spaces? How can we, do that based on the research of the students who did this research, and those of you who just participated in this? We have just a few minutes left. Would love to hear your opinion on how do we make this safer.
I would also be thinking, sorry to take it from anyone, that with adults, a lot of it could have to do with things like monetization, even if that's just like social currency, where people are going to pay a lot more attention to you if you're kind of like baiting for outrage, or people are going to talk about it a bit longer than if it's just like, what a nice experience.
If you want group one's opinion, we kind of had a question like this planned actually. And kind of like one thing that we kind of discussed was like that, like when it comes to these online spaces, real accountability goes like beyond just like consequences, right? And like it's about kind of like recognizing like the impact your actions have, and like then making the conscious effort to change your behavior, which is difficult. Like shame is a big factor in a lot of decision making, and just being, and I think, but like I do feel like proper change and like being a better like presence in an online space comes from being willing to speak up when you seem harm. It's complex, but it starts with like that sense of awareness to some degree, right?
One thing I think about safety in video games, especially when it comes to children or young children, is I've noticed on like Nintendo Switch, there is no option to talk to other people. In some games, you can use emojis, or you can use pre-written chat options like, oh, good job, or something like that, but you don't really have the option to just type whatever you want. And I honestly think that's the safest option for young children until they get past that stage of like testing boundaries and not understanding the weight of their words on other people. So I think that a lot of kids' games, maybe that shouldn't be an option to just freely chat unsupervised.
All right. I think that's it for me. I think that's it on this
Yeah,
end.
and again, well done, Team One. This was just really nicely done.
Yay!
I love the maze is the best part of it. You really rocked it with the maze, and well done. Very, very well done. Thank you again.
Thank you for attending and hosting.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is, yeah, yay.